You stand at the edge of an old Persian village, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and unease in the air. The streets are quiet, but the faint echo of footsteps drifts toward you, and whispers slip through the alleyways as families fear what the future holds for their sons. In that moment, you see the harsh reality of the empire's power agents moving methodically, taking boys who are barely old enough to call themselves men. These young lives are about to be thrown into a world of unimaginable cruelty. They will become eunuchs, forever changed, their childhood stolen, their futures erased, bound to serve inside the glittering but unforgiving walls of the imperial court. If you love uncovering the hidden truths of history, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more stories like this. Drop a comment below to tell me where you're watching from. It's amazing how, across the world, we can explore these forgotten tales together, connected by our shared curiosity about the past. Across the sprawling Persian Empire, where the sun stretched long shadows over marble palaces and busy marketplaces, a darker reality lingered behind the splendor. Young boys, often no more than children, were taken from villages far and wide, conquered lands, distant provinces, to face a cruel and unyielding fate. These boys were chosen to become eunuchs, a group created through ritual and harsh discipline, stripped not just of their bodies, but of the chance to live ordinary lives. The empire, stretching from Mesopotamia's fertile valleys to Persia's dry deserts, demanded loyalty and absolute control. It needed servants who could be trusted near power because they could never challenge it through ambition or heirs. The eunuchs, boys cut off from fatherhood and family legacies, became both indispensable and deeply tragic. Their story didn't start in marble halls or gilded thrones. It began in simple villages where families, sometimes willing, sometimes forced, handed over their sons to imperial agents. These boys were torn from the warmth of home and the safety of childhood, pushed into a world where their bodies and identities would be permanently reshaped. The rituals were neither gentle nor secret. Castration was performed without anesthesia, often with crude tools, leaving scars that mirrored the deeper wounds etched on their hearts. For these boys, the procedure wasn't just physical, it violently severed their boyhood, forcing them into a liminal life between roles and expectations, a life controlled entirely by the empire. But the pain didn't end there. After the procedure, their lives were ruled by strict rules and rigid routines, tying them to the court and its demands. They lived on the edge of power inside the palace, yet always outsiders. They were trusted to protect the royal harem, manage palace affairs, and advise kings, yet barred from the family lineages that defined Persian aristocracy. The world of the eunuchs was full of contradictions. They were both powerful and powerless, close to the throne but denied any legacy. Their lives were a constant balance of duty and marginalization, trapped in a system that took everything from them, yet required their loyalty without question. These boys occupied a very unusual and complicated place in the Persian Empire. They were trusted to be close to the king, acting as essential links between the ruler and everyone else in the empire. Yet, their lives were a constant reminder of loss and control, showing how far the empire could reach, not just over lands or people, but deep into the bodies and identities of those it chose to manipulate. For us today, uncovering these stories is more than a lesson in history. It is a way to connect with real human experiences, to feel empathy for lives shaped by fear, pain, and enforced loyalty. These boys' lives, though filled with suffering, also reveal incredible strength. They push us to see the darker sides of power, the ways it can bend societies, crush innocence, and decide who lives freely and who serves without choice. Beneath the glittering tales of kings, marble halls, and grand empires lie countless hidden stories of hardship and survival, often erased or forgotten by time. To understand the fate of the Persian eunuchs is to step into a world where childhood could be stolen in an instant. Boys who might have spent their days running through village streets, playing with friends, or learning a trade were suddenly uprooted. Their bodies were altered for political purposes, and their identities were reshaped, fragile and constantly defined by the will of the empire. Their suffering calls us to bridge the centuries, to see the human in history, to imagine what it must have felt like to be ripped from home and forced into a life that left no room for ordinary joy. As the empire expanded, with courts becoming increasingly lavish and imposing, the eunuchs were gradually accepted as part of the system, a grim, yet essential reality. Their existence was a stark reminder that the grandeur of empire came at a very human cost. Every palace, every golden column, every ceremonial hall bore silent witness to the countless children who passed through, never to return to the lives they had once known. The rituals that transformed boys into eunuchs were steeped in secrecy and fear. They were known throughout the empire, dreaded by families who realized, sometimes too late, that the reach of the state extended into the most private corners of life. To be chosen as a eunuch was to leave behind the normal course of human experience. No marriage, no children, no ordinary adulthood. These boys became instruments of the state, valued for loyalty yet stripped of personal freedom, their very bodies and futures marked by the empire. Their story is not just a footnote, it is a critical chapter in the human story. It is a tale of innocence taken, bodies reshaped, and courage quietly displayed in the face of cruelty. These boys' lives were both privileged and tragic. They lived close to the center of power, witnessing the inner workings of the royal court, yet they were excluded from the very legacies that defined the empire itself. By bringing their stories to light, we confront a past that is uncomfortable but impossible to ignore. The hidden suffering of these young eunuchs reflects the enduring complexity of human power, how it can protect and control, reward and punish, elevate and erase. Their lives invite us to listen carefully, to honor the pain they endured, and to see how the ambitions of empire left indelible marks on the most vulnerable. As we trace their journey from the moment they were selected, through the frightening transformations, and into the strict, demanding routines of palace life, we enter a world where history's grandeur exists side by side with profound personal tragedy. The Persian eunuchs, though often forgotten, stand as quiet witnesses to the empire's reach. They reveal how an empire could shape not only lands and peoples, but the very bodies, identities, and destinies of those it needed to survive. Telling their story is more than recounting events. It is reclaiming voices lost to time. It exposes the human cost behind the splendor of ancient Persia, reminding us that history is made not only by kings and conquerors, but by the ordinary people who quietly endured the weight of empire in ways both seen and unseen. Within the sprawling courts, the eunuchs held a paradoxical role, vital yet marginalized, powerful yet constrained. They were woven into the complex rhythms of court life, where trust was as precious as gold and loyalty was demanded in the most personal, invasive ways. Every task, every duty, every glance carried meaning. Theirs was a life of contradiction, close to power, yet forever barred from its full benefits. Respected for service, yet denied a future. They were indispensable intermediaries, living proof of the empire's reach and the quiet suffering that underpinned its grand illusions. The story of the Persian eunuchs is a story of resilience and survival, in a world that demanded obedience at the cost of everything else. It is about the endurance of the human spirit, even when faced with cruelty designed to erase childhood, identity, and freedom. It is a tale that reminds us that history is not just made by rulers, warriors, and conquerors, but also by those who bore the hidden, often invisible burdens of empire. And in uncovering their lives, we honor those silent witnesses, giving them the attention, empathy, and remembrance they were denied for centuries. To truly understand the role of eunuchs in Persian society, you have to see the delicate line they walked between privilege and vulnerability, between power and being treated as less than human. They were far more than ordinary servants. In the eyes of the Persian rulers, these boys-turned-men held a unique and crucial place in the empire. Because they were castrated, they were seen as safe, trustworthy guardians who could handle the most sensitive duties without threatening the royal lineage. Unable to father children, they were considered ideal for guarding the royal harem and attending the king personally. Their bodies, permanently altered, became symbols of loyalty marks etched into flesh that signaled their devotion to the throne. Inside the palace, eunuchs performed a wide range of tasks. They acted as gatekeepers, advisors, and administrators, balancing access between the secluded quarters of royal women and the bustling male-dominated political world. This position gave them access to secrets and information few others could see, and for some, it allowed them to rise in rank, gather wealth, and gain prestige. In many ways, they became essential cogs in the empire's machinery. Yet, no matter how high they rose, their altered bodies and the stigma surrounding their status cast a permanent shadow over their lives. The institution of eunuchs reflected the empire's obsession with control over the palace, succession, and the delicate balance of gendered power. By removing the possibility of children, the state ensured that those closest to the throne could not form rival dynasties. This shows just how deeply the Persian Empire intertwined gender, power, and politics, using the human body itself to secure the stability of the state. Eunuchs lived at the center of this manipulation, their identities shaped and constrained by imperial ambition and fear. The privileges they enjoyed were double-edged. They received education, wealth, and positions of influence that ordinary people could not dream of, but they remained outsiders in a society that celebrated masculinity and family legacy. Castration marked them as different, as incomplete, constantly reminding them and everyone else of their subordinate status. In the palace hierarchy, eunuchs could occupy roles ranging from low-ranking servants to high-ranking officials, but their identity as eunuchs always defined them. They were viewed with suspicion, prejudice, or outright contempt by nobles and soldiers, yet some used their position cleverly, becoming trusted advisors or confidants to the king. Their survival depended on careful balance. Loyalty, intelligence, and absolute discretion were essential. Being a eunuch also created personal and psychological challenges. Stripped of physical manhood, they existed in a space neither fully male nor female, challenging the rigid gender expectations of the time. This ambiguity could be both empowering and isolating. Many eunuchs formed close-knit groups, finding support and solidarity in each other, because the rest of the world treated them as outsiders. Their duties exposed them to intimate secrets and court intrigues inaccessible to most, giving them a form of influence but also a heavy burden. They were bound to a regime that had permanently changed their bodies, and the tension between personal agency and victimhood defined much of their lives. The position of eunuchs in Persia is a striking example of the empire's reach into private life. They were living instruments of control, bodies and identities molded to maintain order, hierarchy, and loyalty. Their story shows how the empire wielded power not just over lands and armies, but over the most personal aspects of human life, shaping individuals to serve the state in ways both essential and profoundly cruel. The bodies of the eunuchs were where politics and personal suffering met, showing just how far the empire would go to secure its power. The Persian rulers didn't just shape laws or armies, they shaped people themselves, turning them into tools for the state. This system also exposed the empire's complicated attitudes toward gender and identity. Eunuchs didn't fit the usual ideas of masculinity in Persian society. Their presence in the court showed that gender roles could be flexible when politics demanded it, that power often mattered more than tradition or biology. But even with this special role, eunuchs rarely escaped the stigma attached to their condition. Outside the palace walls, they were often ignored, excluded, or looked down upon. Yet the stories of individual eunuchs were far from all the same. Some learned to navigate the court with skill, rising to positions of influence and handling delicate intrigues with intelligence and care. Others stayed in lowly roles, performing menial tasks and living mostly in the background. Their lives marked by hardship and invisibility. Whether a eunuch thrived or struggled depended on many factors: their personality, their abilities, and the shifting favor of the king. But every eunuch shared a common reality. Their bodies and lives had been shaped to serve the empire's ambitions, a constant reminder of both opportunity and subjugation. In many ways, eunuchs were both victims and participants in the workings of power. They were trusted with responsibility, yet their altered bodies bore witness to the personal cost of that trust. Their existence complicates simple stories of domination or resistance, showing how power can operate through privilege and vulnerability at the same time. Surviving in the palace required intelligence, careful loyalty, and a constant awareness of one's surroundings. The trust the rulers placed in eunuchs was rarely misplaced. Their loyalty was often absolute, forged through shared suffering and lives permanently altered for the sake of the empire. But that loyalty came with a deep, unspoken price: the knowledge that their bodies would never belong to them again, that their destinies had been reshaped for political expediency. Understanding the eunuchs means understanding a complex mix of power, identity, and social expectation. They were central to the functioning of the empire, yet they were also outsiders, always defined by the very conditions that made them valuable. Their story shows how ancient empires relied not just on armies, laws, and politics, but on controlling, transforming, and exploiting human lives. As we follow their experiences, the eunuchs emerge as much more than historical footnotes. They were key players in the Persian court, navigating the delicate tensions of loyalty, influence, and personal loss. Through their eyes, we see a world where devotion came with sacrifice, where influence was inseparable from suffering, and where identity could be both imposed and fluid depending on the empire's needs. Within the shadowed halls of Persian palaces, eunuchs stood as living reminders of the state's reach, their bodies and lives shaped by a mix of political necessity and social judgment. Their story challenges us to rethink power and humanity, revealing the hidden costs behind the majesty and strength of one of history's greatest empires. Across the Persian Empire's vast and varied lands, the selection of boys destined to become eunuchs was often ruthless. Chosen from conquered peoples or the lower classes, their lives were permanently altered in a grim display of the empire's control over even the most personal aspects of human life. This was no random act. Each selection was a calculated strategy, showing just how far the empire would go to maintain its dominance and ensure the loyalty of those closest to power. Across the towns and villages of the Persian Empire, imperial agents moved with careful precision, searching for boys from families who were vulnerable, poor, or living under the shadow of conquest. These children were chosen not at random, but as part of a deliberate plan to strengthen the empire's control. For families, the experience was terrifying and helpless. One moment, a boy could be chasing a ball through a dusty courtyard or laughing while playing with friends in the sun, and the next he could be pulled away by stern men in official robes, leaving parents screaming in disbelief, powerless to stop what was happening. The world the boys were forced into was harsh, alien, and frightening, a place where every familiar comfort was stripped away. Once selected, the boys faced the horrifying ordeal of castration, a cruel ritual that served both as a method of political control and of physical transformation. The procedure was carried out without any pain relief, often by hands that lacked proper training, using crude tools. The agony was immediate and intense, and their screams would echo through the cold corridors or shadowy chambers of the palace. This was not just physical pain, it was psychological trauma, a deep wound marking the end of one life and the beginning of another, defined by fear and loss. Families often never saw their children again, and even if they did, the boys were forever changed, their futures erased as completely as if the empire had written a new story over their old lives. The act of castration served multiple purposes for the empire. By removing the possibility of children, Rulers ensured that these boys could never threaten the royal lineage or challenge the authority of the throne. It was a stark, unyielding display of power, a clear message to the empire's subjects that bodies could be shaped and controlled to serve the state's interests. Sometimes, this act was performed publicly to intimidate other families, a chilling warning that imperial reach extended into the most personal and intimate aspects of life. Afterward, the boys entered a world that was both structured and unwelcoming. They were removed from the warmth of home, from the streets where they had grown up, and placed into a strict and unfamiliar hierarchy inside the palace. Their physical scars were paired with social isolation. In a society that measured identity by lineage and masculinity, the eunuchs occupied a strange in-between space, too old to be children, but barred from the normal rights and roles of adult men. Their altered bodies became a visible symbol of both imperial control and personal tragedy, a permanent mark that separated them from ordinary society. The psychological impact of this transformation was profound. Stripped of agency and constantly monitored, many eunuchs faced loneliness, confusion, and alienation. Their sense of self was fractured, defined less by their own choices than by a state that claimed ownership over their bodies, actions, and even their destinies. Yet despite this brutal initiation, the empire offered them a form of survival within its walls. Their altered bodies, though a source of vulnerability, also made them indispensable. The state designed the system so that eunuchs were dependent on imperial favor, bound to loyalty through a mix of fear, obligation, and limited opportunity. Within the palace, the lives of eunuchs were strictly regulated. They were trained in court etiquette, administrative tasks, and protocol, preparing them to serve the empire's needs with precision. Every movement, interaction, and even appearance was monitored and dictated, reinforcing their separation from the outside world. Some eunuchs rose to positions of influence, leveraging their access to information and proximity to the king to gain trust, respect, and material comforts. Others remained confined to menial roles, their days filled with endless service and quiet endurance. Survival required intelligence, discretion, and a constant awareness of the palace's intricate social hierarchies. The trauma and control extended far beyond the physical. By being witnesses to the intimate lives of the royal family and the inner workings of the court, eunuchs gained knowledge few others could access, but this knowledge came with a heavy burden. It brought responsibility, but also constant pressure and psychological strain. The empire had transformed these boys into instruments of statecraft, forcing them to live lives where loyalty was bought with sacrifice and obedience was inseparable from pain. Ultimately, the story of the eunuchs reveals the human cost of empire in stark detail. Their selection, castration, and training illustrate how the Persian rulers exercised absolute control not just over land or armies, but over the bodies and identities of their subjects. It was a system where privilege and vulnerability existed side by side, where survival demanded adaptation to harsh realities, and where the boundaries of identity were continually reshaped to fit the needs of the state. The eunuchs were both victims and essential players, living symbols of the empire's reach into the most personal corners of human life. Their stories, though often hidden or forgotten, remind us that behind the grandeur of the Persian Empire were countless individual lives marked by loss, resilience, and the complex interplay of power, control, and human endurance. Life as a eunuch in the Persian Empire was filled with pain, challenge, and constant adaptation. The boys often suffered serious long-term health problems from their castration, including infections, hormonal imbalances, and shorter lifespans, making every day a struggle. These physical hardships only deepened the psychological toll. They were socially isolated, cut off from family and friends, and forced to live in a world that saw them as tools rather than human beings. Yet, despite everything, many eunuchs found ways to survive and even thrive within these limits. They learned to navigate palace life, building alliances, forming friendships, and understanding the subtle rules of court politics. Their altered bodies did not erase ambition or intelligence. They simply shaped the ways in which they could exercise it. In many ways, the eunuchs embodied a delicate balance between suffering and influence, vulnerability and resilience. The empire itself was a sprawling, diverse place, and the boys came from all kinds of ethnic and social backgrounds. This diversity shaped who they were, how they were treated, and how they fit into the complex web of court life. Being chosen and transformed into a eunuch was never an isolated event. It was a deliberate part of how the Persian rulers maintained control. Their bodies became instruments of the empire, arenas where loyalty, obedience, and power were written into flesh. Watching their journeys from the moment they were taken from their homes, through the trauma of castration, and into their roles in the palace, reveals just how high the human cost of empire could be. Their stories are heartbreaking, yes, but they also show remarkable courage, adaptability, and endurance in the face of suffering beyond what most can imagine. Inside the palace, their daily lives were a mix of control, influence, and hidden power. Eunuchs lived in a world defined by strict rules, yet they held unique responsibilities that gave them influence in unexpected ways. Guarding the royal harem was one of their most critical duties. This was not just about watching over the king's women. It required extreme discretion, loyalty, and the ability to understand the subtle politics unfolding behind closed doors. In these private spaces, eunuchs became silent witnesses to intimate dramas and power struggles, their presence helping maintain order and secrecy. Beyond the harem, they worked as administrators and advisors, managing palace affairs, delivering messages, and sometimes acting as intermediaries between the king and his subjects. Their unique position gave them access to information and influence that most men in the empire could only dream of, even as their own personal freedom remained tightly constrained. Being a eunuch meant constantly negotiating one's identity in a world that both depended on and marginalized them. They were caught between roles, sometimes powerful, sometimes powerless, and had to remain alert to survive. Every decision, every interaction could affect their status, their safety, and their future within the palace. Yet through this daily balancing act, they demonstrated intelligence, resilience, and adaptability. The story of the eunuchs is not just a tale of suffering. It is a story of survival, ingenuity, and quiet influence in one of history's greatest empires. Their lives remind us that behind the grandeur of the Persian court lay countless personal stories shaped by fear, duty, and the constant need to navigate a world that both valued and restricted them. In witnessing their journey, we see the human cost of power, the weight of imperial ambition, and the remarkable resilience of those who endured it all. Some eunuchs rose to important positions in the Persian court, becoming trusted advisors to the king and even influencing decisions that shaped the empire. Despite these rare privileges, their lives were tightly controlled. Every action was monitored, their interactions limited, and their roles strictly defined to prevent any challenge to the power structure. They were forbidden from marrying or having children, marking them as outsiders in a society that valued family lines and male heirs. This constant reminder of their difference and the empire's control affected everything about their lives. Within the palace, the social hierarchy was complicated. Eunuchs occupied a middle ground. They had access to power and opportunity, but suspicion and prejudice followed them wherever they went. Their altered bodies set them apart, shaping how nobles and courtiers treated them, often with distrust or disdain, even when they worked closely with the king. To survive, eunuchs developed clever strategies. Some formed alliances with other palace officials or influential figures outside the court. Others used their knowledge of palace secrets to gain favors or protect themselves from rivals. These maneuvers demanded intelligence, discretion, and skill, as eunuchs constantly balanced loyalty with self-preservation in a world full of intrigue. Emotionally, their lives were equally complex. Removed from families and denied the chance to have children, many faced loneliness and identity struggles. Many found comfort among fellow eunuchs, forming surrogate families where they could share experiences, support one another, and feel some sense of belonging. These bonds were vital in a world that often marginalized them. Eunuchs lived in a delicate balance between visibility and invisibility. They were essential to the palace, performing critical roles that kept the court running smoothly. Yet their personal stories were often overlooked, overshadowed by the empire's grandeur and the ambitions of its rulers. Despite the limitations imposed on them by castration and social stigma, many adapted, showing remarkable resilience, endurance, and resourcefulness. Their altered bodies influenced not only their health, but also the way they interacted with others and viewed themselves. They challenged conventional ideas of gender and power, occupying a space that was neither fully male nor female, yet full of influence and responsibility. In the daily life of the palace, eunuchs moved between public and private spaces, guarding secrets, maintaining order, and sometimes subtly guiding decisions of the king and his officials. Their presence reminded everyone that the empire extended its power into the most personal aspects of life, shaping bodies and identities to serve its needs. The life of a eunuch was filled with contradictions. They were indispensable yet marginalized, powerful yet restricted, trusted yet constantly watched. Within these constraints, eunuchs discovered moments of human connection, forming friendships, sharing advice, and occasionally finding tenderness or loyalty in unexpected places. They also faced betrayals and rivalries, testing their judgment and resilience. Ultimately, the story of the eunuchs reveals a world where survival depended on intelligence, loyalty, and adaptability. Their experiences offer a glimpse into the human costs of empire, how political power could reach into the most personal aspects of life and alter it forever. These boys, though often forgotten by history, demonstrated strength and ingenuity, quietly shaping the Persian court from within. Their lives were defined by both suffering and subtle influence, and their legacy reminds us that history is made not only by rulers, but also by those who endured, adapted, and persevered in the shadows of great power. The lives of eunuchs in the Persian court show just how complicated survival could be in a system built to control and limit people. These boys lived at the intersection of vulnerability and strength, navigating a world that demanded loyalty while denying them basic freedoms. Their roles weren't just about serving. They reflected deeper ideas about gender, power, and obedience in ancient Persia. Eunuchs challenged the strict notions of what it meant to be male or female, giving us a glimpse into a society where identity was flexible, contested, and often shaped by political needs. At the same time, their very presence reinforced the empire's power, showing how rulers could regulate bodies and relationships to keep order. Life for a eunuch was a constant balancing act between restrictions imposed from above and the small ways they could exercise personal choice. Every day, eunuchs had to remain alert and discreet. Their social survival depended on intelligence, tact, and a careful understanding of court politics. Behind the grandeur of palaces, they quietly sought acceptance, purpose, and recognition in a world that treated them as both essential and other. These boys were never merely servants or victims. They were fully human, navigating a complex existence where they were at once insiders and outsiders, powerful in certain spaces yet powerless in others. Their stories force us to rethink identity and authority in a society where bodies were politicized and loyalty demanded profound personal sacrifice. Eunuchs occupy a unique place in Persian history, often overlooked, yet vital for understanding the inner workings of the empire. Their daily lives, filled with both responsibility and deprivation, show the human cost of maintaining power and the clever ways individuals adapted to structures designed to control them. Within the palace's echoing halls and hidden chambers, eunuchs carried out their duties with a mix of obedience, skill, and quiet determination. They guarded the king's secrets, managed complex court rituals, and sometimes influenced political decisions behind the scenes. Their presence is a reminder that power in the Persian Empire was never simple. It was wielded, constrained, and constantly negotiated. The physical and mental toll on eunuchs was profound. Castration, the defining mark of their status, left bodies permanently altered and minds burdened with loss, alienation, and the constant pressures of court life. Understanding their existence means facing the difficult reality of how political power could reach into the most personal aspects of life. Castration had severe effects on the body. With natural hormone production disrupted, many eunuchs suffered chronic health problems. Unsanitary and rudimentary surgical methods often caused infections. Over time, weakened immune systems, reduced muscle strength, and constant palace stress took a heavy toll. Many eunuchs lived shorter lives, their survival a daily battle against both visible and hidden dangers. Yet, despite these challenges, eunuchs demonstrated resilience and adaptability. Some found ways to form alliances, gain influence, and navigate the treacherous court environment. They discovered moments of companionship and support among each other, creating surrogate families to ease the loneliness imposed by their altered status. Even in a system designed to control them completely, they found ways to assert agency, protect themselves, and maintain dignity. In their daily routines, eunuchs balanced obedience with subtle power, vulnerability with resilience, and isolation with the pursuit of connection. The story of the eunuchs is more than a footnote in history. It's a window into the hidden human costs of empire. They were living symbols of control, endurance, and influence, shaped by the Persian rulers yet shaping the empire in small, vital ways. Their lives reveal the fragile and often painful intersection of personal identity, societal expectation, and political necessity. Through the stories of these boys, we see not only the brutality of imperial ambition, but also the courage, intelligence, and quiet strength of those who lived under its shadow. Beyond the immediate pain and health problems, eunuchs faced long-lasting effects from the loss of testosterone. Their bodies didn't grow or function the same way as other men, leaving them weaker, more tired, and often struggling to control their emotions. Mood swings, exhaustion, and occasional depression added to their sense of being different, even while they moved through the halls of power. Society measured men by strength and vitality, and for eunuchs these changes made them stand out, isolating them further despite their important roles in the palace. The psychological toll was just as intense as the physical. Many eunuchs wrestled with a fractured identity, caught between the memories of boyhood and the harsh reality of their altered bodies. Castration robbed them not only of their future as fathers, but also of ordinary family life. They were excluded, shunned, and often treated as outsiders. Loneliness pressed heavily on their spirits, creating a constant undercurrent of sorrow. Inside the palace, the demands of loyalty and secrecy intensified this pressure. Eunuchs were expected to hide personal feelings, obey without question, and live according to the empire's strict rules. Every action was observed, every movement constrained, leaving little room to express individuality or dissent. Anxiety, depression, and a continuous struggle to reconcile selfhood with duty were daily companions. Yet, despite these immense challenges, eunuchs showed incredible resilience. Many formed close bonds with fellow eunuchs or trusted allies, creating small communities that felt like surrogate families. In these connections, they could express vulnerability, share frustrations, and find comfort. These relationships became lifelines, offering emotional support and a sense of belonging in an otherwise alien world. Some went further, using their intelligence and court knowledge to navigate palace intrigues skillfully. By learning secrets, forming alliances, and negotiating favors, they carved out spaces of influence, turning imposed limitations into opportunities for agency. These moments of subtle power were not only survival tactics, but acts of resistance, reclaiming identity in a world designed to erase it. The complexity of eunuchs' life extended beyond palace walls. Though barred from traditional family roles, some forged meaningful friendships, mentorships, or alliances that defied societal expectations. These bonds were fragile, often tested by prejudice or tension, yet they revealed the enduring human desire for connection and recognition. Physical changes and psychological strain made eunuchs vulnerable to the shifting tides of court politics. Their status depended entirely on the favor of rulers or powerful patrons, leaving them constantly exposed to betrayal, disgrace, or exile. This instability magnified feelings of anxiety and helplessness, reinforcing the precariousness of their existence. Health struggles often worsened these vulnerabilities. Chronic illnesses and weakness limited their ability to perform duties, threatening their positions. Medical knowledge was primitive, and the empire valued their well-being only to the extent that it served its needs. Eunuchs' bodies were tools of the state, prized for service and discarded when no longer useful. Still, hardship did not define their whole experience. Many eunuchs adapted, survived, and even thrived. Some rose to positions of notable influence, shaping decisions at the highest levels of the empire, proving that resilience and intelligence could carve a path even in the harshest circumstances. Through all of this, the lives of eunuchs were a blend of pain, endurance, and quiet triumph. Their stories reveal the human costs of power and control, but also the incredible capacity to adapt, connect, and assert agency, even when every aspect of life had been controlled by others. The lives of eunuchs in the Persian Empire reveal the extraordinary ways human beings endured hardship while still exercising cleverness, strength, and subtle influence. These boys were removed from ordinary life and placed in a space where their identities were constantly reshaped by forces beyond their control. Without the usual markers of masculinity, they occupied a middle ground that made them neither fully like other men nor entirely excluded from male-dominated spaces. This in-between position affected how they saw themselves and how others treated them, creating challenges in every social encounter and forcing them to negotiate their place in a world that often misunderstood them. Despite this, many eunuchs discovered ways to cope with the profound physical and emotional changes imposed on them. Some sought comfort in religion or philosophy, trying to find meaning in lives dictated by the empire rather than their own choices. Others expressed themselves through storytelling, art, or mentoring, shaping legacies that extended beyond their immediate circumstances and reminding the world that their existence mattered. The trauma of castration left not only physical scars, but deep emotional ones as well. Many eunuchs lived with ongoing health issues caused by unsanitary surgical methods and hormonal imbalances, including fatigue, mood swings, and vulnerability to illness. Their altered bodies made them stand out in a society that linked masculinity to physical vitality, increasing their isolation even as they were thrust into positions of proximity to power. They were cut off from family life, denied the possibility of fatherhood, and often shunned outside the palace walls, leaving many to experience profound loneliness. Within the court, constant surveillance, strict hierarchies, and pressure to demonstrate unwavering loyalty compounded their psychological burden, creating a landscape filled with anxiety, depression, and the daily tension of surviving under constant scrutiny. Yet, even in these extreme conditions, eunuchs showed remarkable resilience. They built supportive communities with other eunuchs, forming surrogate families where trust and solidarity offered a rare sense of belonging. These bonds allowed them to share vulnerabilities, exchange wisdom, and navigate the treacherous court environment together. Many also sought to assert influence in creative ways, leveraging knowledge of palace secrets, forming alliances with powerful courtiers, or mediating between the king and subjects. These efforts allowed them to carve out niches of power and agency that transcended their physical limitations and positioned them as essential actors in the empire's daily functioning. Their strategies were a mix of survival, subtle resistance, and skillful navigation of complex political networks, demonstrating intelligence and adaptability in an environment designed to suppress both. Over time, the role of eunuchs evolved along with the empire. In the early Achaemenid Empire, eunuchs were central to palace life, guarding the royal harem, advising the king, and maintaining strict control over the court's most private spheres. Their castrated bodies symbolized loyalty and prevented threats to the dynastic line. They were integral to the functioning of imperial governance, trusted with secrets and responsibilities few others could hold. But as dynasties changed and foreign powers arrived, including the Macedonians under Alexander the Great, the established systems of Persian governance began to shift. New cultural attitudes and military priorities challenged the authority and function of eunuchs. The status that once guaranteed influence became precarious, and roles were often redefined under new rulers who had less reliance on their unique position. Even as their importance diminished in certain ways, the personal stories of eunuchs remained a testament to resilience, adaptation, and survival under extraordinary pressure. The daily existence of eunuchs was a constant balancing act between constraint and agency. They moved through the palace's grand halls and secret chambers, performing duties that were critical to court life, from guarding intimate spaces to managing administrative tasks, while always under scrutiny and bound by rigid social codes. Despite the harshness of their physical and social conditions, they often found moments of tenderness, friendship, and even mentorship, showing that human connection could persist in even the most controlled and oppressive environments. Their presence highlights the complexity of power in the Persian Empire. Bodies and identities were manipulated, yet the people inhabiting them still exerted influence and found ways to maintain dignity. The story of the eunuchs reminds us that behind the grandeur of empire were individuals grappling with loss, creating meaning, and navigating a life both constrained and extraordinary. Their experiences reveal not only the human cost of imperial ambition, but also the ingenuity, resilience, and enduring spirit that allowed them to survive and, in some cases, thrive despite unimaginable circumstances. Over time, the influence of Rome and later the Parthians introduced new ways of thinking about eunuchs and their place in society. These foreign powers sometimes used eunuchs in their own courts, but attitudes toward castration and the social standing of eunuchs varied widely. The Persian eunuchs, once secure in their unique positions, began to face uncertainty as their political value decreased and cultural prejudices grew stronger. Inside Persia, shifting politics made life even more precarious for them. Changes in royal families, rival factions, and the changing favor of rulers could instantly upend a eunuch's position. Their roles were often tied to a specific king or patron, and when leadership changed, so did their fortunes. Many who had once held influence found themselves sidelined, stripped of privileges, and left vulnerable to exile or disgrace. This loss was not just political, it was deeply personal. Eunuchs who had once enjoyed authority and respect suddenly became outsiders, exposed to social scorn or indifference. Where they had once been trusted advisors or protectors within the palace, some now faced betrayal or humiliation under new regimes. Public perception of eunuchs also shifted over time. While they had once been seen as indispensable instruments of imperial control, they gradually became subjects of suspicion, ridicule, or pity. Society's evolving ideas about gender and purity, influenced by Zoroastrian teachings as well as later Christian and Islamic moral frameworks, increasingly framed eunuchs' altered bodies and ambiguous identities as improper or unnatural. This growing stigma made life outside the palace even more isolating. As borders shifted and empires rose and fell, eunuchs often found themselves caught in historical currents beyond their control. Some were exiled to remote provinces or foreign courts, where their influence was minimal. Others disappeared entirely, their lives unrecorded by historians more concerned with kings and battles. The arc of their lives often mirrored that of the empire itself, once central, respected and powerful, later fading into the margins. Yet even during decline, some eunuchs showed incredible resilience. Those who could adapt often aligned themselves with new rulers or carved out roles in emerging political systems. Their knowledge of court life, administration, and palace protocols remained valuable, allowing a few to retain influence, though never at the level they once held. Surviving these changes demanded cleverness, flexibility, and the ability to navigate dangerous political waters. The tragic outcomes for many eunuchs highlight the human cost of these upheavals. Discarded by the system that had once prized them, they faced loneliness, poverty, and humiliation. Removed from centers of power, some succumbed to despair or violence, vanishing into obscurity or ruin. Their fall serves as a stark reminder of how quickly favor can turn to abandonment in the unpredictable world of imperial politics. These shifting fortunes also reveal larger truths about empire and identity. The eunuchs' lives demonstrate how status built on bodily difference and usefulness could be fleeting. Their stories were shaped not only by personal abilities or character, but by the rise and fall of empires, the expansion and contraction of territories, and the blending of cultures over time. In this way, the experience of eunuchs offers a window into Persian history itself, showing how ordinary individuals navigated the complex, often unforgiving currents of power, survival, and identity. The story of the eunuchs offers a window into how fragile and complicated human life could be under the weight of empire. What had once made them essential, their castrated bodies, unwavering loyalty, and unique role in the court, eventually became a source of vulnerability as politics shifted and new cultures influenced Persia. Life for eunuchs was never certain. Their status depended entirely on the favor of rulers, the changing priorities of the palace, and the whims of powerful patrons. Some who had held great influence under one king were cast aside under another, betrayed or forgotten, leaving them exposed to exile, marginalization, or worse. Many of their fates remain hidden, erased from official records, yet even the fragments that survive speak of resilience, adaptability, and a remarkable ability to navigate a world designed to constrain them. These boys, selected in childhood and subjected to irreversible transformation, were forced to live lives defined by both suffering and surprising forms of agency. Their bodies marked them as different, yet their intelligence, discretion, and insight allowed some to wield influence far beyond what their physical limitations might suggest. Within the palace walls, eunuchs learned to survive by reading political currents, cultivating alliances, and understanding the subtleties of court life, using their knowledge to protect themselves, advance their interests, or quietly shape decisions at the highest levels. The shifting tides of empire complicated everything further. The arrival of Roman and Parthian influences introduced new cultural perspectives, often less tolerant of eunuchs, and changing attitudes hardened social stigmas surrounding castration and ambiguous gender identity. What had been an asset, their altered bodies and unique proximity to power slowly became a liability, increasing their isolation and subjecting them to suspicion, derision, or pity from nobles and courtiers. Religious and philosophical currents, from Zoroastrianism to the later rise of Christianity and Islam, emphasized ideas of purity, order, and conventional morality, framing eunuchs as transgressive or impure, and further alienating them from society outside the palace. Their identities, once carefully managed within the court, became sources of tension as they navigated a world that increasingly judged them for the very qualities that had made them valuable. Exiled eunuchs, displaced to distant provinces or foreign courts, often disappeared into obscurity, their lives unrecorded by history, illustrating how quickly favor could turn into abandonment in the harsh and unpredictable currents of imperial politics. Yet amid hardship, the resilience of the eunuchs shone through. Many forged bonds with fellow eunuchs or loyal allies, creating surrogate families that offered companionship, understanding, and shared strength. These relationships provided rare spaces where vulnerability could be expressed and solidarity could flourish, allowing them to maintain a sense of identity and purpose despite the systemic forces seeking to erase them. Some eunuchs leveraged their political acumen, navigating court intrigue with skill, using insider knowledge to protect themselves, negotiate favors, or assert influence in subtle ways. Their creativity and resourcefulness transformed limitations into opportunities, showing that agency could exist even in the most constrained circumstances. Beyond the palace, some found ways to connect, mentor, or guide others, asserting their presence in a society that often sought to marginalize them. Their altered bodies, while imposing restrictions and creating social stigma, also positioned them in a liminal space where they could observe, advise, and sometimes manipulate the flow of courtly life. The psychological and emotional weight of their experience was profound. Cut off from family structures, denied the possibility of fatherhood, and living under constant scrutiny, eunuchs endured loneliness, anxiety, and a persistent negotiation of selfhood. Yet even here, resilience emerged. Some immersed themselves in philosophy, religious study, storytelling, or the arts, channeling pain into creation and meaning. Their lives reflect a complex blend of suffering, adaptation, and quiet triumph, demonstrating that even those who seemed powerless could exercise influence, nurture relationships, and assert identity in subtle but profound ways. As centuries passed and as dynasties rose and fell, the role of the eunuch shifted, reflecting broader changes in governance, culture, and empire. Once central to the stability of Persian court life, they gradually became more marginal, yet their legacy persisted in courtly traditions, administrative practices, and cultural memory, revealing how individual lives intersected with the sweeping tides of history. The eunuchs stand as a reminder that the human cost of empire is never just political or territorial, it is deeply personal, marked on bodies, psyches, and social identity. Their stories, often hidden, illuminate the intersection of survival, power, and endurance, showing how humans navigate impossible constraints and still find ways to live, connect, and assert meaning in the face of profound adversity. The story of the eunuchs is a reminder of the everyday human struggle, made even more intense by the extreme conditions they faced. Their lives were shaped not just by personal suffering, but by the demands of a vast empire. Their bodies were turned into instruments of political necessity, where loyalty was enforced through control over both their physical selves and their social roles. The Persian Empire reached into the most private corners of life, taking children and shaping them into a permanent state of service and otherness. Childhood innocence was stolen, replaced by lifelong responsibility and limitation, showing us the hidden human cost behind imperial power. Remembering the eunuchs is more than just looking back at history, it is an act of justice. It gives a voice to those who were silenced by time, circumstance, and authority. These were real people, not just abstract figures in textbooks. They felt pain, longed for connection, and searched for meaning in worlds that often denied them both. Their experiences urge us to feel empathy, to see beyond the grand stories of kings and battles, and to understand the individuals whose lives were shaped by forces far beyond their control. Their story also resonates today. The struggles of the eunuchs echo modern conversations about identity, power, and the ways society tries to control bodies and lives. They lived with labels and roles forced upon them, yet within those limits, they found ways to survive, adapt, and even exert influence. Their resilience reminds us that strength can exist even in the harshest circumstances, and that courage is often quietly shown in the face of relentless hardship. Through the lives of the eunuchs, we learn that human societies are complex, where power can protect but also destroy, where identity can be assigned but also reclaimed, and where survival demands extraordinary determination. Their story transforms history from a simple record of rulers and wars into a mosaic of real human experiences. By remembering these boys, We honor their endurance and their search for dignity. They become witnesses to the human spirit's capacity to withstand unimaginable conditions, showing us that history is not just about those who hold power. It is about everyone who lived through it. The tale of the Persian eunuchs is not just an old story from the past. It is a living reminder of the costs of empire, the struggle for selfhood, and the courage it takes to survive in a world that tries to erase you. Their lives teach us to listen to voices that history often forgets, to recognize the humanity that persists even when authority tries to suppress it, and to remember the resilience and strength that exist in all people, no matter their circumstances. Their story endures as proof of the will to live, to adapt, and to be remembered, a beacon of courage and endurance in the shadow of oppression. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more historical tales that reveal the hidden lives behind the grand narratives of empires.